Education and the school governing bodies of 2 Limpopo schools have launched an urgent court application against the Department of Basic Education and provincial education departments. Now, the application challenges the department's failure to roll out the national schools nutrition programs to all learners. Let's take this discussion further, and to understand this court application, we're joined via Skype by Equal Education Co-Head Research, Rone Mcfarlane. Rone, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Blaine, and good morning to your viewers.
So let's just understand this application. Equal Education and some SGB schools have filed this application, a court application against the Department of Education. Take us through it.
So usually around 9 million learners receive a meal at school through the National School Nutrition Program. That program was stopped when schools closed on the 18th of March, which on Thursday would be 3 months ago. And for many learners who received that meal, it's the only meal of the day. Now, throughout the lockdown period, Equal Education Section 27, the Equal Education Law Centre, and other children's rights organisations were in constant communication with the Department of Basic Education, urging them to reopen the school nutrition program and noting the severe consequences of malnutrition on young kids and the fact that there isn't any alternative program reaching these learners. Then on the 19th of May, the minister publicly committed to reopening the National School Nutrition Program to all learners.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, during her press conference on the 1st of June, backtracked on that commitment and then said the nutrition program will only be rolled out to learners who are returning to school, which is grade 7s and grade 12s.
So you say 9 million learners rely on the school nutrition program. Have you been on the ground to see some of the effects of not receiving this?
Yeah, Equal Education, for the court paper specifically, we've spoken to a number of learners and their parents, but we've also done an internal survey of our learner members across 5 provinces to understand a number of things, including their access to nutrition during this period. And the stories that we have received are really, really hard to read. And even now that some learners have access to the nutrition program at school, those who have gone back, those learners are faced with really difficult situations, such as that their siblings are still at home and are struggling. Parents have told us about the difficulty of not being able to afford basic food during this time and not being able to look after their children. You know, it's a really desperate situation, and that's why we are launching this application on an urgent basis.
So what were some of the reasons given by the Department of Education for just providing this meal for those who are returning to schools and not those who are yet to return?
Initially, when schools closed on the 18th of March, the minister said that they would be working closely with the Department of Social Development to identify learners whose families require food assistance. However, the Department of Social Development has simply not had the capacity to reach all of the families that require nutrition, and especially not those 9 million learners.
Yeah.
Then, as I said, she had committed to, now that schools are reopening, to roll the nutrition program out to all learners, but then backtracked, saying that the department first needs to find their feet and will only be able to do that at a later stage.
But so practically, how will this work in terms of getting to all 9 million learners who need this sustenance? You say the capacity was an issue. What are you putting forward in terms of how they can do this logistically?
Well, the reality is that the school nutrition program is an existing program, rather than, for instance, the Department of Social Development, which is trying to roll out food packages beyond the capacity that it's done in the past. The funding is there, schools are there, and staff feeding learners are anyway at school to provide meals to those learners who are back at school. The minister initially said that provinces will be developing plans on exactly how this will work, whether learners will, like what was the case in the Western Cape during lockdown, would come into schools for a takeaway meal every day, or whether they would come to school, for instance, to collect a food package which would last them for a certain period of time. The standard operating procedures that the Department of Basic Education published does provide for safety measures that must be taken to ensure that food is provided in a safe and hygienic way. So it's definitely not impossible to roll out this program, and the minister has not provided convincing reasons for why they are unable to do this.
Right. Look, you've been talking about safety measures and children returning to school. What's Equal Education's view about schools reopening? You satisfied with everything being in place in order to keep learners safe?
You know, the real challenge is going to be when all learners come back to school.
Yeah.
We've now seen the grade 7s and grade 12s come back to school, and the department has reported on readiness in terms of accepting those learners. But the DG himself pointed out that this is only about 13.4% of learners who are currently back in school. And so really the real monitoring and questioning should be happening around when all learners return and whether the department is ready to accept all those learners. And so far, they haven't given us information on that. We're conducting our own internal survey of learners who have gone back to school. And we're hoping to keep track of developments in school as those responses come in.
What sort of responses have you been getting so far?
It's very early stages. We've gotten about 300 responses so far from 98 individual schools. And the learners so far say, for instance, that they, if they take into consideration the measures that their schools have taken, they want to be at school, they don't want to be at home. You know, a lot of learners do want to learn. The initial reports are that learners are wearing their masks, they're getting screened at schools. But the real question is whether those practices are able to be sustained over a longer period. And as I say, when all learners return to school, that will be the real challenge.
Yeah, it's you know, when you see some of these learners who eat their lunch, especially the younger ones, separated by these blocks that are painted on the ground. I've seen some of these pictures. This breaks your heart because you want them to interact, you know, with their fellow learners, and I guess it disrupts the spontaneity of being a child. You worry about that?
Definitely. I mean, I don't think anyone would want for kids to have to go to school under these circumstances. And I agree with you that those pictures of learners not really being able to play or having to sit far apart are really sad.
Yeah.
The reality is that some of the experiences that learners have had at home during this time have been as difficult. And so there really aren't easy solutions during this time.
Rone, we thank you very much indeed for coming on and giving us some insight and perspective with regards to also this court application. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right, that was Rone Mcfarlane, Equal Education co-researcher. Well,